Well, you know what time it is. Almost a year ago, I had the pleasure of covering the haunted PS1 demo disc, a collection of short games made by a community of extremely talented devs, all sharing a similar love for the many different eras of retro gaming, as well as the technical intricacies that came with those. Warping textures, low poly models, and art directions way ahead of their time, while still managing to evoke some sense of nostalgia. And while I absolutely don't regret covering the demo disc, because I generally had tons of fun, on top of becoming friends and acquaintance with many of the devs behind those games, there's definitely a part of me that wishes I could go back and maybe approach things differently. Dedicate more time to each of those games. Talk about what I felt while playing them, or maybe go in with a bit more finesse instead of trying to purposely find things to nitpick in order to look like a real big YouTube reviewer. I was still trying to find my footing at the time, and you can tell that the extremely uptight sense of quote-unquote objectiveness was completely unnecessary. Cause trying to find at least one thing to criticize per game is cool if that's your thing, but I don't know, I ain't about that life anymore. Especially as I continue to cover more and more stuff here. Cold hard critiques are great and all, but to me, they're nothing without the feelings behind them. Feelings of which I had tons to spare. So much so that a lot of those games really ended up sticking with me. Not to mention the couple that actually got full releases since then. It was a really fun time. Though maybe I shouldn't have waited till the end of the video to say that. But you know, blame it on the growing pains and all that. Nothing better to make up for it than to once again highlight the Haunted PS1 community's work in the form of their latest collaborative effort, the Haunted PS1 Demo Disc Spectral Mall, this time offering 20 games for you to discover, all neatly wrapped in a launcher acting as a game itself. Even though last year's launcher, the museum, was already very enjoyable to navigate through, you can definitely tell they went above and beyond this year. The mall is this fully interactive experience with puzzles to complete and items to collect, on top of having an atmosphere that really ties the whole thing together. It feels like this natural extension of what they did last year with the secret unlockable games, but taken to a whole nother level. Replacing the museum wings, we now have personalized storefronts, showcasing each demo's respective vibes, and I don't know, seeing them light up as you approach just felt special. Or even seeing some of them purposefully locked away until you get a certain item. It made me look forward to each game even more. Though if collecting dimes and keys isn't your thing, the demo disc, just like its previous iterations, comes with every game launchable from a select screen. Though I personally think exploring them all manually added a lot to the overall experience, especially in the spookier segments. Before I get the games rolling though, one last thing. To make it easier, mostly on me, each demo will be covered in the order I played them, besides the secret ones. That's gonna be left for the end in case most people don't want to get spoiled. And on this, let's get started with the very first demo of this year. Mortal Meal is an exploration game by Goblin Council, in which you play as a lost soul. Recently deceased, you have to explore the small town in hopes of figuring out what happened to you, or where your missing body even is, all while avoiding the gaze of this ever-changing, face-stealing creature who seems hell-bent on consuming any soul it reaches. Even without the admittedly pretty horrifying premise, the game just oozes with style and atmosphere. The town's such a pleasure to explore with places like the PC repair shop and its puzzle, requiring you to pay attention to your surroundings and explore a bit. The forest section and its more action-oriented gameplay, or even the chase sequence with the soul-stealing creature. There's a couple of collectibles you can find, unlockable CDs spread around town, though they don't do anything yet, so consider them more of a small taste of what's to come. Mortal Meal's biggest selling point so far seems to be its vibes. I don't know why, but the game just perfectly encapsulates what I think of when someone says Halloween. It's reflected beautifully in the setting, the choice of colors, especially in the skybox and the lighting. They probably could have gotten away with just chucking the player in the darkest of nights possible and gave you a flashlight or something. But in doing the opposite, they managed to create this almost ethereal vibe to it, which fits very nicely thematically with you being a lost soul and all that. Overall, really hoping they stick with that sort of aesthetic for the rest of the game. It's something you don't exactly see every day, and personally, I revel in that. Described by its creator, Zik Baguri, as a surreal and absurdist foray into an interactive diorama, Babo Sanyar is probably the closest I'll ever get to putting in words this sort of strange and very intimate feeling of nostalgia many of us have felt over the years. The uncontrollable yet understandable yearning for days long gone. The desire to bottle up and recapture those feelings. The game starts off with our little protagonist guy on their way home to visit family for the holidays. What ends up happening instead is a trip down memory lane via the medium of VHS tapes, each of them showcasing places, people, memories even, that were but unfortunately no longer are. It's reflected even further in how some areas are blocked off. The VHS tapes unable to capture the entirety of each scene, but instead only focusing on what our protagonist remembers. It's a really cool way of showcasing the theme, though I imagine it's mostly used to limit the play spaces. I think this game is going to be an acquired taste for some, mostly because of the way it presents itself, not just on an aesthetic level, though I can already see some people raising eyebrows at how weird and wacky the game looks on the surface, but they don't know what they're missing. Babo Sanyar's sense of humor seems directly inspired by old-school YouTube poops, memes, and other forms of early internet culture. It acts as this beautiful love letter to that era, on top of tying well into that whole theme of fleeting, uncapturable nostalgia. I just really vibe with that. And while the game definitely has some more somber parts, usually in retrospect, it's not to say that it ever feels bleak or anything the sort. As a matter of fact, quite the opposite. It's filled with so much charm and humor coming from every side. The unique and beautiful art direction, the NPCs and their distorted yet almost poetic feeling dialogue. It's definitely one of those games that leaves a lot for you to think about after you're done with it. With House of Necrosis, Warcus presents us with a very simple concept on paper. What if Resident Evil 1 took the form of a mystery dungeon game? More zombies and less tearful goodbyes to Pikachu, if you know what I mean. But the execution is what makes it truly stand out. It's easy to just get inspired by stuff, but for it to be coherent, to actually make it work, is an entirely different task. The anticipation of traveling through narrow corridors, never sure when the next enemy's gonna jump you, all while counting every single precious handgun bullet or herb you come across. The high-octane action of fighting against the last boss, and just knowing that you might run out of shit to chuck at him if he doesn't go down soon. Just some real nerve-wracking gameplay in the best way possible. Just like in many other survival horror games, the mere sight of a save room still evokes some giant sigh of relief from my part. You know, some things are just too good to change. There's definitely gonna be some fuckboys out there who will complain about how blatant the inspirations are, but I don't cop with that nonsense. It's something to be proud of, and honestly, the execution is so clean that it feels just like a minor nitpick by a bunch of killjoys. To me, House of Necrosis exemplifies perfectly one of my favorite things about video games, let alone any form of art. There is nothing cooler than being able to pinpoint one's personal inspiration, and just see how that reflects through their work, video games especially. It's a good way to gauge what sort of idea resonates with each artist, what concept they vibe with, and I don't know, it adds this almost deeper personal connection to their work. At least that's the way I choose to see it. Miracle Bug in the Electric Limbo is a short exploration game by Autumn Rain, which takes place in this black and white, 1-bit pixel art world. While I don't exactly understand the implication behind its story, I felt pretty captivated by it. After a short opening cinematic, filled to the brim with what seems to me like symbolic imagery, you're then thrusted into this strange unknown land, Limbo as it's described, the transitory place between the realms of the living and the dead. You're kinda left to fend off for yourself, figure it out as you move forward. The only help you can get being by inspecting objects around the world and talking to NPCs with varying degrees of stranger danger. At least, not everyone's a ram-skull-headed person. The game has this drastic shift in gameplay near the very end, the Ascension, where you play through these sort of WarioWare-style microgames. While it was pretty sudden and unexpected, it felt like a really nice surprise. I worried that my commentary for Miracle Bug in the Electric Limbo might seem a bit lacking, but it's very much one of those games best left unexplained. That way you can go and experience it on your own, figure out the meaning of things for yourself. It might have been slightly out of my comfort zone when it comes to games I would typically play, but maybe that's why it felt so special in the end. If you've played last year's demo disc, you might recognize the name Fever Dream Johnny as the creator of Peeves Adventure, one of the games that really stuck out to me back then. Ever since, they've been posting a lot of work in progress on their Twitter, most of which included this demo by the name of Nowhere, Michigan, a first-person Metroidvania of style above all else, but most importantly, one now available for all eyes to see. You play as James, a young man looking for his brother after he ran away from home, which inevitably leads you to the town of Nowhere, the ground zero of a reactor detonation that's changed the local area forever, making it what it currently is, clowns, wizards, and truffle-sniffing cops included. The world of Nowhere, Michigan is just beautiful, with this almost mixed media feel. In a way, it reminds me a lot of Crypt Worlds, not only in its usage of 2D sprites for NPCs, but just the overall vibe, especially when it comes down to the more absurd side of dialogue. It's definitely not afraid to be out there, and I fuck with the vision. The side quests all feel whimsical, and it's one surprise awaiting another. You can actually find Peeb and Orbo if you look hard enough. The game has a pretty big emphasis on exploration, and while it might seem a bit simple at first, you'll eventually obtain a gun on top of unique movement tools to add to your arsenal, which will let you access even more areas. There's plenty of secrets to be found, including a boss encounter amongst many other objectives. Despite being a demo, this already feels like a nearly complete game, so I'm really looking forward to seeing what else Johnny has in mind, especially with how much of a strong start this is. Sorry We're Open by Oats is the perfect representation of what it's like to work in a grocery store. I wouldn't exactly know, I only worked retail for a while, but it's what I like to imagine. You play as the new manager of a supermarket branch, and you're expected to manage employees, occupy yourself with both day and night shifts, as well as make every single important decision needed to keep the store running. It's effectively a genre crossover of management sim and RPG, with a dash of dungeon exploration for good measure. As time goes by, you find yourself exploring the premises, collecting items and finding monsters, most of which take the shape of everyday objects like shopping carts and mannequins. Combat is a lot less about forcing your way through enemies, but rather taking the time to analyze what's the right move for the right situation, especially since the manager's HP can be easily dwindled down in just a few moves. To no surprise, my favorite part of Sorry We're Open is its art direction. Not only is the sprite work beautiful, but the entire game has this vibe of a forgotten 90s training tape. Every time you're given new information, it comes with this retro VHS filter and corporate hound dogs gnawing at your ass about productivity in the workplace. Welcome to the corporate ladder, fucko. Hope you enjoy your stay. It's just incredibly charming the entire way through. Can't wait to see what else dares to hide in the grocery aisles on my shift. High-speed action, grappling hooks, and a dark atmosphere. This is what Matthew Lawrence offers you with Enchain, a frenetic first-person shooter inspired by the likes of Quake and Dark Souls. To be honest, at first, I was kinda worried. When I hear inspired by Dark Souls, I tend to have this pretty visceral reaction. Not that there's anything wrong with it. It's just that we've gotten more than a fair share of Souls-like experiences in the last couple of years, most of which tend to look at their inspiration in awe, trying to successfully recreate what it has done. But I really appreciate the way Enchain approaches its inspiration. Rather than trying to label itself as one genre or another, it instead takes elements of this and that and beautifully fuses them together. No soul collecting, you're on the move with a gun and a grappling hook. The fighting is quick and the movement even more so. Rather than the gameplay, it's the level design that's very much reminiscent of the first Dark Souls, with its interconnected world. Levels that tie back to each other, in this case to the central hub, this little lamp near the start. And it's this really cool thing to see additional routes and extra areas branch off from here. There's additional guns to collect, all of which feel extremely good to use, though I have a slight preference for the shotgun due to the sheer amount of power it packs. And the movement really emphasizes how cool the raw gameplay is. With your grappling hook, you can just swing across the entire place, wall run, slide, it's just a whole lot of fun. There's even an outside area fully accessible, acting as this sort of end of the demo, though it's really cool to have this more open playground near the end rather than being confined entirely in the first level. Definitely looking forward to seeing what else gets added in the future. Perlin Festival by Talon Zane is a surreal exploration game akin to something like Yume Nikki or Osamu Sato's works. Think LSD Dream Emulator, Eastern Mine, or even Chutang. You play as Pluto as they explore the abstract landscapes of the noise. The game has a huge emphasis on exploration and random events, so you'll be traveling through places, looking around for what's changed, and interact with a few NPCs along the way. While some might prefer a more linear experience with maybe a goal in mind, I personally hope to see Perlin Festival lean even further into its randomness and overall lack of clear direction. I just love the idea of this ever-changing fever dream world, one where even the most safe of places could see changes in whichever way seems fit. Maybe have some doors lead to specific places on the way in, but a completely different one on the way out. Lots of cool ideas to toy with. Another thing I hope they lean more into is collectible items. If you ever make your way back to your room at the very start of the game, you can see items reflecting where you've been displayed in there, and that's a really cool idea. Makes it feel almost like a badge of completion for every zone. Though it's not like Perlin Festival has a solid goal for completion right now. It's more about taking in the sights and making what you will of them. Though I think that raises one slight criticism I have for the game. Currently there's one zone entirely relegated to housing signs with donators' names on them. And while I absolutely love that because those donations went to a great cause, a Trans charity fundraising event, I feel like maybe that should be delegated to a special area rather than just being in a transitory zone, sandwiched between two others. And if it's not intended to feel like a big deal, maybe spread them across the entire game. Just some food for thought, because I think it'd be cool to highlight them even more. Though I hope this doesn't come off as a dig to the overall experience. It's pretty much the minorest of nitpicks, you know? In the end, Perlin Festival was this super cozy experience, and I'm really looking forward to seeing what other worlds awaits in the future. They Speak from the Abyss by Nikki Kalpa is this beautifully orchestrated symphony of hellish screams guiding our protagonist into a world she has yet to prepare for. Haunted by the memories of a woman she can vaguely recognize, Vanessa has to traverse hell and back in what can only be described as painfully guttural backgrounds. And I mean that in the best way possible. The gameplay for the moment is this very early, narrative-driven work in progress, acting as a sort of prologue. The events of the demo and the NPCs you'll meet often refer to a baptism, which will happen sometime soon. This adds this sense of almost urgency to the game. There's no combat yet, only some basic environmental puzzle solving through item collecting and door opening. But the world around you and its hostile ambiance sells the experience altogether. I have nothing but praise for the art direction, and it's clearly the demo's forte. If the beautiful environment didn't convince you already, then perhaps the charming cast of lovable fuckos will, such as the killer and his trustworthy personality, the twins and their loving words of compassion for our protagonist, or even this little guy who could do no wrong. And while the game obviously drives the point home that the Abyss is no place for someone like you, there's still some sense of calm found here and there, especially in the Frozen Lake section. It's pretty exciting to think about what sort of areas we'll get in the future, but one thing's for sure, I already shiver in anticipation for my journey through the Abyss. Fear the Spotlight by the folks at Cozy Game Pals open up on a pretty straightforward premise. You're searching for your friend and you've seen her wander into the old closed-down wing of your high school. With that in mind, you'll have to travel the rubble and remains as you try your best to solve puzzles and collect items. The most crucial part of this process, though, is avoiding the Spotlight, this very threatening creature roaming freely around the area. While the idea of a patrolling creature isn't new, the fact that the cone of that spotlight is plainly visible adds a lot of tension to the scenario, all while serving as a neat accessibility feature. Instead of having to gauge whether or not you're being seen, here it's very obvious if you've been spotted. There's a direct indication if you're safe or not, and I feel like that's the first time I saw a design element like that in any survival horror game. The demo is fairly short, but in the amount of time required to fully play through it, it still manages to leave a lasting impression with its detailed environment, especially when it comes to places to hide in. The level seems purposefully designed in a way that you always have some safe spot to duck under or behind, though leaving said place is another story. Without an option to run, it makes each encounter with the spotlight even more tense. Hoping that they keep this sort of ambiance going forward, because from what I've got to play so far, it was a really nice taste as to what's to come. Future Reality Softworks coming at you strong with their eponymous demo, Future Reality. A fast-paced racing game taking place in a dark future ruled by Omni corporations, overrun entirely with fleshy abominations. Your goal is to become the one who will race beyond speed. Though realistically, the lore behind the game is more of a dressing for the high-speed gameplay and some of the coolest aesthetics known to me. Legit, the entire UI just screams retro-futuristic. The menus have this sick-ass orange tint superimposed on some bright blue background. This is what the internet should have looked like. Some unholy fusion between Neon Genesis Evangelion and the Lawnmower Man. Further emphasizing just how cool Future Reality is, the racetracks are just those beautiful, grungy amalgamations. You can pick up meat to further boost yourself along the racetrack, or even just perform repairs on your ship before it crashes uncontrollably. Some really good shit. Though I guess that raises one question. Boosting by burning meat turned into fuel, I get that. But repairing your ship with it, that leads to some pretty weird implications. Nevertheless, really looking forward to seeing the future tracks and the ship models, even though I'm very clumsy when it comes to driving. Yet the overall vibe is what kept me coming back, trying again and again to do better. I can already see a lot of people getting hooked on this one. Despite being featured on the Haunted PS1 demo disc, Be Knighted by Microtonal Matte seems to take a lot more inspiration from the N64 side of retro gaming. After an incredibly charming intro cinematic, you're introduced to our protagonist, a bee whose home was just recently destroyed during an intense thunderstorm. From that point forward, you'll have to traverse the dangerous lands awaiting for you and meet strange and new foes along the way. This game actually uses one of my favorite concepts ever in any form of media. The idea of following a character who's very small in a world all so big. And I feel like Be Knighted personifies that wonderfully. The world itself can be your enemy at times, with raindrops actively hurting you, and many obstacles that wouldn't cause any issue for bigger protagonists, but does for our little bee friend. You'll be finding items and upgrades along the way to make your life just a bit easier, though that's kind of an understatement with how some of those enemies can get, specifically the bosses. Even though the experience was super fun, I think there was a huge case of early difficulty spike. Some secrets can be locked behind some pretty tricky jumps, or rather hover since you can't jump, which makes sense because of their optional nature. Both of the demo's bosses, though, gave me enough trouble that it kinda soured some of the enjoyment, at least when I was playing through it. And that's not even counting the extremely unforgiving stealth segment right before the second boss. I feel like with some of those values toned down, Be Knighted has an immense potential because what's offered is legit amazing. The world is beautiful, the character design is nostalgic yet feels entirely fresh, and the overall gameplay is very pleasant. Just a tad difficult, even for N64 Zelda veterans. Developed by Gamma Girl, Gob is a short exploration game with a visual flair like no other. The art direction is this very claymation-esque look into a world that is both abstract enough, yet feels entirely tangible. The backgrounds are those beautiful, pre-rendered shots, and makes the relatively dingy interior really interesting to navigate through. The entire game has a sort of forgotten cartoon vibe. You know the stuff you caught on TV maybe once at like 3 AM and then never again? It just haunts your memories, taunting you with a name that's just on the tip of your tongue. Gob. It feels familiar yet entirely new all at once, and I really fuck with that. Gameplay-wise, you have to solve puzzles by finding, combining, and breaking items apart in order to progress further. At the start, it has this very trial and error, almost point-and-click vibe to it. You're kinda just slapping stuff together in hopes that it works out. But the moment it clicks, specifically the moment where you realize you can actually take stuff apart, it just really works well. Specifically when it comes to the later puzzles like with the vending machine. There should be more games like Gob out there. Titles where they're not afraid to present you with just a little dude walking around, collecting shit and messing around with it. Some genuine little guy energy, and it's the stuff I'm always down for. Dead Letter Department by Mike Monroe was probably the scariest of the demos this year. Working at a temp data entry job, you have to translate lost mail and letters that have nowhere else to go. While the goal of the game is fairly straightforward, don't let that distract you from what's really happening in the background and all around you. The more you play, the weirder things get. I appreciate greatly the juxtaposition of this sort of menial, day in, day out sort of task onto the admittedly pretty tense setting. Your workplace is this dark and dingy room. Though the more I transcribed each letter, the less anxious I felt. I started off taking it pretty seriously, trying my best to get everything right, trying to read in between the lines of each letter. Maybe that was the intention of the developer, to have me piece the story together, slowly as I got through those seemingly random letters. Though the further I got, the more that sense of unease came back. Some letters purposefully obscured, strange things happening in the background, noise that shouldn't be heard since I should be alone here. At a time, it almost felt like someone was breathing down my neck, and I just love how they managed to play with that tension so easily. Dead Letter Department seems to be leading up to some other form of gameplay other than just sitting at your desk, mostly implied in the ending sequence, but I'm really curious as to what else they're gonna put in here, because I'm completely sold on what's already available, though I'm sure that regardless of where they're heading, they'll manage to spook more than one. Your childhood home has never felt less reassuring than in Mothered, the immersive first-person horror adventure by Enigma Studio. You play as Liana, a young girl coming back home from a big surgery, only to be met with the strange facsimile of a mother, one who looks somewhat familiar but feels completely off, stilted in her tone, her movement, like someone's just wearing her skin, trying their best to impersonate her. The entire game has this very tense atmosphere surrounding it. Stuff that would feel very normal for some, like hanging with your mom outside in a family orchard, has you wondering if you're really safe out there. Not to mention some pretty harrowing moments like being completely in the dark and having the prompt, "You cannot sleep when someone is in your room," only to find your mom in the corner, just standing there, ominously staring in the distance. The presentation is also really cool. If you've played Enigma Studio's previous work, Equistasis, and last year's demo disc, you'll recognize this sort of aesthetic. Very retro-futuristic, but in a cool way. Like those transitions that feel ripped straight out of a 90s VHS. Some legit good stuff. The demo for Mothered acts more as a playable teaser, since it's already received a full release, and apparently you can get some exclusive content to demo if you've already played through the full game, which is pretty neat. Really don't want to spoil too much about it though, because the ending was 100% worth it. Blast Cats by Rob Everhart is a colorful callback to an era of gaming we don't see a lot of people using as inspiration nowadays. You help CC, this gnarly-looking, bomb-chucking cat, traverse a spooky mansion and its assortment of obstacles in order to find her dad, who conveniently got lost in there. On your way, you'll be collecting power-ups and keys, all while visiting special stages in between each major objective. Special stages that emphasize certain elements of your moveset and ask of you to use them appropriately. When it comes to actual gameplay, I'm getting huge Wario Land vibes with a fast and expensive moveset that just takes a bit of time to get adjusted to. The start was a bit tricky with certain segments, like this specific bomb jump or the Cloud's hitboxes being just a bit too tight, but the overall experience was very solid, especially the more you play. Something I imagine will be a point of contention for some might be the camera. It's no issue in the main area of the game, since the cameras are in predetermined spots, but in the special stage you can rotate it freely at the cost of 2 inputs. And during tight jumps that require you to move your camera to get a better view of stuff, it might cause some unnecessary deaths here and there. Though I think that can be fixed pretty easily by either automatically having the camera snap to you with one press, or just having predetermined locations like in the main stage. It didn't negatively impact the experience, since it was fairly rare that it actually became an issue, but you know, something to keep in mind. The entirety of the demo was super fun, with a whimsical yet charming atmosphere and some music that just slaps. The game culminates on a boss fight, which actually went even better than I expected. Really like the way it gets harder gradually by making you both move and throw bombs at the same time. Overall, really looking forward to seeing Blastcat's full release. Created by Duonic Studios, 10 Dead Doves is a short horror story where you play as Marcus and his friend Sean as they both travel through the Appalachian wilderness. This soul-searching journey leading to strange happenings and ever-growing mysteries. The game's fixed camera angles leading to even more tension as you find yourself having to navigate through the increasingly darker landscapes. Almost as if each different camera placement was something stalking you, watching from not so far away. Also, the characters' faces being painted onto their 3D models adds even more to this sort of uncanny vibe the game has, and I really fuck with that. It feels a lot more unique than trying to recreate some form of realism, all while feeding off into the overall atmosphere the game's got going. The world is strange, hostile, and unfamiliar to our protagonist, but it feels genuinely beautiful. The setting, especially with its choice of color palettes. It feels exaggerated enough to be a bit video gamey, but gives off this almost oil painting look to it. The sunset over the gas station making the scene feel much more warm. At least a lot more than if I were to show you a photorealistic recreation of a roadside gas station in the middle of nowhere. The car segment with the purple sky and the seemingly infinite rows of trees you're passing by, highlighting the almost distant, awkward conversation both friends are having. Just some really good stuff. Though I think the one scene that stuck with me the most is the very esoteric sequence at the start of the game. It made a huge impression on me, and I'm really hoping to see more stuff like that in the full release. 10 Dead Doves seems to be striking a really good balance between old-school survival horror tropes and a perfectly moody atmosphere, which definitely makes me hopeful for its future. If you had the opportunity to take some candid pictures of Baba Yaga, would you have the strength to do so? Coming out the gates strong as all hell, North Star Courier by Ben Drury is a cryptid photography game seeing you move to a small town to take a package delivery job. Meanwhile, you also get to explore the surroundings, snapping pics left and right of the local fauna. While the movement felt initially a bit slow for my taste, it wasn't too long until it was remediated by giving you this really cute customizable scooter. The moment-to-moment gameplay feels so snappy. I love being able to just ride around town and see what leads to where. The overall gameplay loop and its emphasis on exploration, or rather discovery, made sure I felt familiarized with each of the game's available areas. And I don't know, there was just something special and cozy about the experience. It felt very much like Moon Remix RPG or Majora's Mask, but minus the threat of the moon crashing over your head. Here, it's just a very weird clock tower and some strange G-Men lookalikes. A feature I like a lot is the cassette player. It's such a small detail, but being able to play tracks on demand just felt really cool. I don't want to spoil it too much, because it's very much an experience best played by yourself, but I had an immense amount of fun. The ending left me with this huge grin on my face, and I can't wait to see more. Also, if you do play it, don't forget to check out the cheat codes menu for some couple extra goodies that are totally worth it. The next game on the list is the first bonus one of this year's demo disc. Unlocked in a mall via some clever exploration and item collecting, Arcade Woe by Vladimir Lore sees you stuck for eternity in an arcade, your soul being locked away from you behind the prize counter. So in order to claim it once more, you'll have to win and collect tickets in order to buy it back. Even though the games available in the arcade are fairly limited with only 2 options, the ambiance is super fun. Each character offers you their own little quest with their own high score to beat and will reward you even more tickets if you do so. If a game of haunted PS1 flavored Space Invaders isn't your thing, you can also just scrounge around the place to find more tickets on the ground or hidden all around the place. Not to mention, the more prizes you buy, the higher the modifier for your ticket collection grows. So you're actively incentivized to buy the smaller prizes first, not just because they look cute, but also because they help you get to your soul much faster. I didn't expect to like this demo as much as I did, but it was an incredibly fun time. I imagine this was made specifically for the demo disc rather than as a form of standalone future release, but I'd love to see the concept expanded somehow, like a full arcade with more spins on the classics. Just really vibe with the idea of a virtual arcade, and that's not something you see often. And last but not least, the second bonus game of this year, Sauna 2000 by Amos Sori, an entirely new look at one of the previous entries from the 2020 edition of the Haunted PS1 demo disc. Restricted to only 15 minutes of playtime, you need to make sure to grab enough supplies to heat up the sauna and make sure your vacation goes undisturbed. From getting the water into the steamer, emptying the heater's ashes, to even just cutting and lugging around your own bundles of wood, Sauna 2000 has this very cozy vibe. The gameplay emphasizing the relaxing nature of the Finnish lakeside you're visiting. Every action done is recorded in your little notepad in the form of a checklist, and it felt pretty satisfying to see each of them get progressively checked off, even more so as the time limit kept running on and affecting the world around you. The sun slowly setting and leaving you with this really nice view of the lake. It makes the anxiety of the timer ticking disappear almost instantly. Mostly saying that because I accidentally spilled water out of the bucket like 3 times in a row and had to redo that all over while the time was running out. Presentation seems to be a huge part of this game's ethos. The demo's opening literally taking you from a computer screen and dragging you into the game seamlessly. Having followed Amos's work on Twitter for quite some time, I can definitely tell there's going to be some sights to behold, especially when it comes to a couple of work-in-progress shots they posted of a Japanese bathhouse. I'm looking forward to seeing how that will tie into the game and whatever else might come in Sauna 2000's full release. And with this, we are officially done with the Haunted PS1 demo disc Spectral Mall. Once again, an absolute pleasure to go through. Huge props to every single dev for their individual works, but also to the entire team of people who work behind the scenes to make this compilation happen in the first place. It's been a huge highlight of the last 2 years to see this community come together and make some pretty amazing stuff. From the yearly events like the demo disc and the Madvent calendar, to each individual releases. Just some really good stuff all around, and I'm hoping to see more in the future. I'll be linking the demo disc and other appropriate community links in the description, so if you have the chance, make sure to check them out. It comes at the highest of my recommendations.